process. Okay, so this is a little bit of a snapshot of what it looks like. So they will be uploading a letter on your behalf, yes, but they'll also be rating you based on this rubric. Now, it's all on the Common Application these days, so all your teachers and counselors will have their own accounts for Common App, and they'll be simply evaluating or ranking you based on qualities such as these, right? So best case scenario, they're going to be saying that you're one of the top few they've encountered in their career, so top 1%, okay? So I've seen some really glowing recommendation letters over the years where some teachers have even said like, oh, so we've sent a couple of our prior students to your university, and this student is by far stronger than any of them, right? If you get a recommendation letter that sounds like that, hey, that's going to really, really help you out, okay? So of course, it's hard for you to know. This is definitely not something you're privy to, right? You won't be able to kind of like get access to this and take a look at them unless you waive your rights. So there's on the application, there's a thing called FERPA, which is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, I think it's what's called. Now, we normally tell students, though, to go ahead and waive their rights to this because we want to let colleges know that you totally trust your teachers and that you're not going to be looking over their shoulder and want to see everything they've written about you, okay? So that's another thing too, when you're doing your college applications, it's highly advised that you waive your rights to be able to access these later on when you're at that university. Okay, so if you're a younger student especially, what can you do then to go ahead and prepare? What can you do to impress these teachers? Well, first of all, make sure to participate in classroom discussions, right? So it's not necessarily just like talk a lot and talk frequently, but really make sure that when you do talk in class that you're making intelligent comments, that you're actually asking smart questions that help further the discussion in class, and that you're making genuine contributions to sort of like the direction of the academic discourse in the class, okay? So, it's definitely important for you to work on building these relationships with your teachers. So yes, in class, definitely talk to them, try to make a good impression. If there are opportunities for you to interact with these teachers outside of the class, if they're, let's say, for example, they're also a moderator from a club or activity and you really want to be able to get to know them and vice versa for them to get to know you better, it might be good to even consider joining a club in which that person is a moderator and advisor for, okay? You might want to consider giving them thoughtful Christmas gifts or birthday gifts, when appropriate, right? Now, it's not just about like getting them something expensive. I highly recommend that you think about something that looks like it came from your own personal budget and something that's a little bit more well thought out rather than just simply a gift card with a lot of money in it, right? And lastly, if your teacher does recommend certain things like, oh, to read an extra article or a book recommendation, or if they say like, oh, there's an extra credit museum field trip if you check it out, because this is something we talked about in class, those would be good opportunities to show that to show your teacher that you really, really are interested in what they're teaching you, okay? And then lastly, definitely, even if you're a great student in class, like you're a straight A student, don't like fall asleep in class. Don't be caught like doing other teachers' homework in their class, just because it does sort of like show them that maybe you don't really care as much about what they're saying. So even if you are a straight A student, those things can maybe tarnish a little bit their sort of image of you. So this is something that you need to work on and develop over the course of several months, several years even, okay? All right, so your activities are also pretty important. Now, interestingly enough, it looks deceptively like it's a low priority, but it's not really, because in the grand scheme of things, you will have, if you're applying to the most competitive schools, excellent grades, students writing great essays, solid, glowing recommendation letters. So what you do in terms of your activities could be those crucial tiebreakers that distinguish you from equally qualified, excellent applicants as well. So this is definitely where building a profile of outstanding activities, both related to your major and also both to show your passion and interest for other things, is going to be very important. So many years ago, when I used to do interviews for Harvard, we used to rate students based on this scale in terms of their extracurriculars. And as I want you to note here, it's not really about how many activities, but rather like what's the highest level of achievement or accomplishment you're able to attain, right? So students that are ranked 1 were pretty rare in my book, right? So not everybody got a 1. In fact, in most cases, people who got a 2, which we could also rate students as like a 2+, a 2, or a 2-. Usually, students were getting into Harvard even with like a 2+. A 1 was kind of rare. In fact, I only rated maybe like a handful of 1s over the course of several years of interviewing for Harvard in the past. And what they say here is ranked a 1 being the best here is if you had national or international recognition for a certain activity, right? Or even professional potential for your activity, or truly unusual achievement, right? So this is, of course, extremely rare. Now, national or international recognition doesn't mean just simply, being ranked or doing well on on a national competition. It definitely means that you are like, like you've accomplished a lot in the context, of a national or international level activity. So many students will get in even with more like school-wide, regional, or statewide activities, right? Or major leadership or contribution. So the student who's, let's say, for example, president or vice president of 3 clubs, did well enough at their local state competition, that probably wouldn't garner a 1 in terms of this rating, but probably would get like a 2 or 2+, right? Depending on what they were able to accomplish. Okay, many students who are applying to these schools like Harvard, who have nice activities, but there's not really that much to distinguish them, will probably earn a 3. Okay, a 4 would probably mean that, hey, you're probably not getting in, to be honest, because you're not very involved in your school, right? Now, there's a 5 and 6, but it's really for several other things. Like 5 says substantial activity outside of the conventional activities. It doesn't mean it's worse than a 5. It just means that they need to evaluate it based on the fact that, hey, maybe, for instance, you are in a single parent household and you had to, as the oldest sibling, had to take care of your younger siblings. You maybe had to take a part-time job or something. That's definitely something that they need to factor in. And in many cases, that could be just as impressive as maybe someone who had all these like cool activities otherwise. And also there's a 6, which is special circumstances limit or prevent participation. Okay, so this just gives you some context in terms of how top colleges will typically evaluate your extracurriculars. So it's not really about how many, but really what can you do at the highest level, right? So if you have an activity that you can do at a very high level, I would highly recommend that you try to see how competitive you can be in that one activity and really try to do the best you can, but also maybe have some side activities so there's a little bit of variety there as well. It's probably not a good idea to be entirely, blindly one-dimensional in terms of your activities. So and they know that too, that if you're basically like, let's say, a star athlete and you are, very dedicated in your craft towards a certain sport, that probably trades off with having like more clubs or activities, right? So that's definitely something you need to factor in, right? So don't necessarily shortchange your top activity because you feel like, oh, I need I need a sport, or I need an officer position, I need, to have more clubs. So if you see something that you're really good at, even if it's not necessarily related to your major, it might make a lot of sense to really try to do your best in that activity to see what you can accomplish by the time you're a junior or senior in high school. Okay? All right, so some key recommendations here. So try to channel your energies to activities that you're most passionate about and talented in so that you can hopefully be regionally or even nationally competitive by the time you apply. Right. So top colleges are really looking for evidence of such things as love of learning and genuine passion. So you really want to try to demonstrate this through your essays and your extracurricular activities, and if given the opportunity, through your interview. Okay, so with standardized testing still sort of not quite as important as it used to be, right? It's important for you to have like good, solid recommendations. That's definitely something you want to showcase in terms of your qualifications. And for top colleges, they're really looking for top shelf intellectual potential. Yes, your grades are important, but they want to see that maybe there's evidence that you can be a genuine scholar in your field someday, right? So that's definitely something that if you have the opportunity to avail of certain things like, a research internship, I think that would be a great way to show your advanced skills and your passion for a certain field, like whatever, that's going to be potentially your major. I think that's all good to have. Okay. All right. So another key element that you want to have in your profile is volunteering. I think over the last few years, if I've seen students getting into top colleges and universities, one of the key things that has maybe been a common denominator for all these top students is that they have volunteered extensively, both at their school and throughout their communities, right? So it's really about showing colleges that you care about making an impact. So many of these schools, when they're looking for students to pick, they want to see that you have an record as a difference maker, because that's their ideal. That's their sort of goal for you. If they're picking you as a student, they're investing in you as being part of their community so that when you graduate from their school, that you're going to make them look good, right? That you're going to make an impact in many ways throughout your community, or just making a positive impact to society at large, right? So when you're looking for volunteer opportunities, it's also important to make sure that you're not simply doing it to rack up hours per se. I think many students get lost in this and basically think that it's all about how many hours you have. Sure, that's impressive, but I think colleges are more looking for like, hey, are you making a genuine impact? Are you building relationships with people in that organization or within the context of that volunteering opportunity? Okay. So really try to connect with those people, because ultimately, while yes, it's very good to be able to get things like the Presidential Volunteer Award, right, based on the number of hours you have, I think it's much more telling if you can get a really solid recommendation letter from maybe the organizer or the supervisor of that volunteer organization, and being able to show colleges that this is something you've genuinely had a passion for and that you have a true commitment to sort of helping out other people within the context of that organization. Or it doesn't have to be directly dealing with people, especially if it's for feels like an environmental, like, cleanup or, climate change awareness or something, right? What I typically say is that there's no tier list in terms of what kinds of community service are inherently better than others. In other words, find what you're passionate about. Find what you truly want to make an impact in. If you like working with the elderly, if you like working with kids or with animals, do your thing. Find out what you're passionate about, because ultimately you do want to feel that you're making a difference, and that you really are dedicated to that particular cause that you're volunteering for. Okay. Now, as far as overarching recommendations, though, for volunteering, some of the things that I've talked to some people in the past about is that this was a report several years ago now, almost a decade ago, but it's still very much true. So the report was from Harvard's Education School, my alma mater, where they basically recommended three main things that they want to see for students when they do volunteering, right? They want to see meaningful, sustained community service. The key operative word here being sustained. So they say here that they want to see at least a year of sustained service, right? So they're not in it to just see like, hey, I spent a week volunteering somewhere and that's it. I'm good for volunteering. I didn't do any volunteering for the rest of high school. Okay. They're much more impressed with students who do genuinely take the time to, devote their time and energy towards helping a particular cause over an extended period of time. Okay. They also want to see collective action that takes on community challenges. So, whatever the field or whatever the cause area that you're devoting yourself to, it's much more important to show that you're really trying to tackle problems within that space, right? So if you're, largely doing things like homelessness, right? So are you making an impact? Are you really trying to solve some of the issues in your local area? If you're trying to do things from like environmental cleanup, like what types of things are you tangibly making an impact in your local community? Okay. And then lastly, they want to see that students are, developing authentic, meaningful experiences with diversity, right? So when colleges talk about diversity, it's not just about who you are and your ethnic makeup. That's part of what they mean by diversity, but it's also they want to pick people who actually interact with people from different walks of life, from different socioeconomic and cultural and ethnic backgrounds. Because when you are a part of their community later on, they want to make sure that you are someone who knows how to thrive in that sort of a community. So if you can showcase that through your volunteering, all the better. Okay. All right. So last major area we're going to talk about today, standardized testing. Some of you probably seen this in the news or recent articles. Many colleges are now bringing back their standardized testing requirements. So for the last couple of years, we've known that colleges, even throughout the pandemic, colleges like MIT, Georgetown, a few of the Florida and Georgia schools have still required the SAT. A change in recent months since like this past February, for instance, which interestingly enough coincided with the release of the new SAT. But like more than half the Ivies will now be requiring SAT or ACT again. So Harvard most recently, Brown, Dartmouth, and Yale, although Yale has a bit of a spin to it, right? So they say that they will require you to submit a form of standardized testing, be it the SAT or ACT, or they will also allow you to submit your AP scores or your IB scores in lieu of your SAT or ACT. Now, Cornell recently said that they will start doing it in fall 2025, but it's not quite like the other IBs, right? So they basically say their system is a little bit more complex. It's not just that they will require, they actually don't require it. They say it's test recommended, right? So it's not for all of their different colleges either, right? So their College of Arts and Sciences is recommended, their College of Engineering, their College of Human Ecology, among others, and their ILR school, as well as their public policy school, they say it's recommended for 5 of these colleges, right? So keep that in mind. And this kicks into effect for fall 2025 cohort, right? So yeah, so it won't necessarily be applicable for students right now, okay? All right, so how does this impact you? Well, I normally recommend then, even if you can still go test optional for the majority, in fact, the vast majority of colleges, something like 80% of colleges will still allow you to go test optional. Just to make sure that you're not shut out of potentially applying to some of these schools, it makes sense for you to go ahead and prepare for the SAT or ACT. So if you're a younger student, I normally recommend starting to prep for these tests even as early as freshman or sophomore year. Generally speaking, as long as you've satisfied or you've completed Algebra 2 and Trig, you've already satisfied the highest level of math you need for both the SAT and the ACT. If you've already even taken this as early as 9th grade, which I think for some school districts you can, the summer after 9th grade would be a great opportunity for you to go ahead and take test prep because some top colleges out there, actually, both Princeton and Stanford, do have essays like, how did you spend your last 2 summers? And you probably don't want to write about how you spent a good chunk of your summer preparing for the SAT or ACT, right? Because we do want to kind of like give colleges the impression that, hey, you know what? I did well and I only took it once or twice and I didn't even have to prep for it, right? At worst, if testing isn't really your forte, you can still go test optional. You just maybe need to sort of tailor your college list a little bit more to focus on schools that do allow you to opt out of submitting a standardized test score. Okay. All right. Oftentimes I get asked, SAT or ACT, which test format is best for me? One of the key things to note is that since 2 months ago now, the SAT has shifted to a digital format. It's no longer on paper like it used to for decades, right? So the key thing to look at is to compare whether or not you're better suited towards the old paper version, in which case the ACT is still an option for you, or if you really like and can do better in the digital format, then of course SAT is the better option for you. So there's some sort of minor differences, like the reading passages in the SAT are much shorter now because they only focus on like one question at a time. So it's like they give you a passage and then one question, a short passage, one question. Whereas the ACT will still have its longer page-long passages and then multiple questions afterwards, okay? The ACT does have a science section, but it doesn't really, it's not like an AP science where it requires you a lot of content knowledge and to memorize the scientific information. It's really more like scientific reasoning, okay? And lastly, colleges don't have a preference for one format or the other, so it behooves you to go ahead and take a practice test for each one to try to see which test format you can actually do better in, okay? So with that, I do want to tell you a little bit about HS2 Academy, our company. So we've been helping students get into the top colleges across the country since 2002, and so we've been growing ever since. So we now have students not only across the United States, but even internationally. This year, we've had tremendous success, as usual, getting students into a lot of the top universities like Stanford and Harvard and many of the other Ivies. We've got a couple of students into Cambridge as well in the UK, right? So beyond that, we are also getting a lot of our students into top UCs like UC Berkeley, UCLA, and a lot of the other top universities across the country, right? So of course, we're just as proud of students who didn't even think that they can get into a UC or let's say, for instance, a top state school, not just the students who are getting into the top like Ivy level schools, because for us, it's really about maximizing your potential and really trying to get you to do more than you would have accomplished on your own, okay? Now, we do have a ton of summer offerings this year to help you if you're still struggling to look for certain activities to help bolster your profile before you enter in your college application phase. So at HS2, we do offer summer online classes for both the digital SAT and the ACT, as well as preview classes, like I mentioned, for some, a whole range of AP classes. So if you do want to keep ahead and try to do the best you can for your upcoming APs, it definitely be a smart call to try to take advantage of our preparation classes for them. So there's a QR code here to the right. Please scan it if you want to take a look at, at our offerings for the summer more carefully. We also have some wonderful courses available with our partnership through UC Riverside. If you wanted to take a UC approved course in either data science or intro to business, this guaranteed to transfer over and count as a general education requirement for any of the UCs that you may eventually attend. It also is a good way, even for private schools, if it's a UC course, it is almost guaranteed to transfer to any selective university, okay? Now, we also have a partnership with the Harvard Crimson, right, which is the school paper of Harvard. So if you're interested in journalism, this would be a great way to get some hands-on experience. But it's not really just limited to students who are interested in business. The Crimson also has, because they're a student-run sort of organization or business, there are business elements that you can intern for as well. Students who may be interested in STEM, but also want an activity to show that they're more versatile could also take advantage of an opportunity like this, even if it's not necessarily related to their major. Okay. We also, for the more STEM-minded students in our audience, we do have opportunities. We do have a partnership with George Mason University to do a summer internship for NASA data science analytics, and in which case the sort of like capstone project there is to have you included in a published research paper, right? So that would be a wonderful opportunity, not just for students interested in things like astronomy or astrophysics, but even for students who are interested in like computer science or engineering. Having a good solid data analytics or data science summer internship would be a great stepping stone for other research internships in the future, okay? Now, we also, for maybe the more sort of natural science inclined students, have a data analytics summer program for biology and medical science, also through George Mason University, right? So these are both wonderful opportunities for students who, let's say, for example, are still at that stage right now. It's May. If you didn't necessarily get into some of the summer programs you've attended, this could be a wonderful way to not only show that you're taking full advantage of your summer, but especially if you're a younger student, this could be a great stepping stone and resume builder, kind of an internship to potentially get you even more competitive internships down the line. Okay. So with that, I do want to open things up for Q&A. All right. Looks like we already have some students, or not some students, but some audience members going